everyone. I hope you are doing well. My name is Arun and I would be the moderator for today's exciting event. I would first like to thank you for taking time out to attend the Interactive Learning Power Hour session hosted by Harbinja. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Power Hour is a series of interactive roundtable discussion among industry stalwarts, where they would be sharing their experiences and insights on a particular topic. So the topic for today's discussion would be designing L&D for success in the post-pandemic world, the CLO point of view. Before we begin, a few housekeeping tips. In case you cannot hear the audio, ensure you have selected the right speaker for the audio output. You may test the same to see if it is working fine from the audio setting option on the lower left corner of your screen. If necessary, dial in using phone. With that, now it's time for the introduction. Our host for today's roundtable is Dr. Vikas Joshi. Dr. Vikas Joshi is a business leader who is passionate about product development and technology entrepreneurship. His mission is to help create software products that make a difference. A key part of that mission is to inspire tech professionals and entrepreneurs to grow and develop. We welcome you, Vikas, and over to you.
Thank you, Arun, and a big hello from San Francisco on this lovely morning here. There's a little patch of light behind me. Hope that doesn't bother you. We have a great audience of professionals today and an outstanding panel of experts. I want to welcome our panel, but before I do that, I just wanted to set the context of this Power Hour. So here's our game plan. We're going to focus on three things today. By talking to these experts, we're going to discern the shifts that are occurring in the role of the Chief Learning Officer, and by implication, the learning and development function. We're going to get to know the changing key performance indicators of L&D. How do you measure L&D success? And finally, we're going to discuss various ways to implement reskilling and upskilling initiatives, because that's consistently emerging as a big theme. Does that sound good? So with that, let's jump right into it. We're going to be able to see the expanded role of CLO to deliver business results, describe L&D KPIs, and especially how the L&D professionals will need to adapt to the broadening role of learning and development function, and strategize your implementation of skilling initiatives. As we all know, these are challenging times, particularly those of you who are joining here from India, from Europe, from Brazil. The pandemic is raging. I mean, the second wave is worse than the first. Supply chains are getting disrupted, demand patterns are shifting, working from home, learning from home, and balancing life's different priorities has not been easy for many workers. Despite these challenges, there's never been a more exciting time for learning and development, because now is the opportunity for L&D to play a critical role as a change agent. Now, I'm part of a Chief Learning Officers community at the University of Pennsylvania. And whenever we get together, there's one question that gets debated with great vigor. In fact, nothing more gets debated with greater vigor than this question. Does learning and development have a seat at the C-suite table? LinkedIn Learning published a workplace learning report recently, and here's what they observed. Nearly 2/3 of L&D professionals said that the L&D seat at the C-suite table is secure in 2021. And this is a 27 percentage point lift from what they reported at the beginning of 2020. This is unprecedented shift in the span of just 1 year for a group of professionals who have spent years hoping one day they would earn that seat. What is driving this change? Our expert panel members will say more on this, but in my view, here's one factor that is driving this change. Workers, managers, and business leaders are feeling the pressure to upskill and reskill. The fundamental pattern of work and interaction has changed. 6 out of 10 say that COVID-19 and the resulting economic crisis has accelerated the need to acquire new skills. And this is according to a recent report by Degreed. In fact, this may be a good time to ask you a question. What are the top 3 focus areas of learning and development programs in 2021? We have a great audience today, so let's run a quick poll here. I'm going to start this poll, and I will launch the polling so you can see it. And go ahead and select maybe 2, 3, 4 priorities that you see for 2021. Our goal is to see which ones make it to the top 3 by the time polling is over. And then we will compare that with what LinkedIn found out in their polls and surveys. So we'll give it another couple of seconds, and I'm gonna, okay, 75% voted. I will end polling just about now. And I'm sharing my results here. And as you can see, upskilling and reskilling makes it to the top of the list, followed by diversity and inclusivity, and then leadership and management. When LinkedIn Learning surveyed a bunch of L&D professionals with the same question recently, here's what they found out. Clearly, upskilling and reskilling tops their list as well, followed by other priorities, as you can see. How are chief learning officers viewing the world from their vantage point? We are going to find that out just in a moment. This is, in fact, a perfect time to meet our panel. I'm really excited to welcome Jyoti Joseph and Ken Hubble on Harbinger Power Hour. Just by way of quick introductions, Jyoti is a learning and development leader who has had 25 years career with Standard Chartered Bank. For the first 14 years, Jyoti worked in retail banking, and later she moved to learning and development. In 2016, she moved into the bank's central learning team located in Hong Kong, where she curated and created learning solutions for client engagement and professional development. Her last 2 roles saw her leading a learning transformation project and implementing a learning experience platform. Jyoti is joining us from Zurich, Switzerland. That's her home. Great to have you with us, Jyoti.
Hi, Vikas. Thank you.
We also have Ken Hubble on today's Power Hour. Ken is the Senior Vice President of Instructional Design Strategy and Innovation at Wells Fargo Bank. He currently leads a team of 60 learning specialists and innovation experts at the bank's L&D organization that serves the needs of over 270,000 employees. Wow. For over 30 years, Ken has been in the business of creating award-winning solutions, leading the transformation of learning programs and a variety of companies and agencies, including Ingersoll Rand, Caterpillar, the United Nations, FAA, NASA, and many others. Welcome, Ken. It's an honor to have you as well on our Power Hour, right?
It's exciting to be here.
Great. So we're going to launch right into the discussion here. To get you started, a couple of questions. What shifts do you see in the role of the Chief Learning Officer? Maybe that's the one we can start with. And maybe Jyoti, do you want to go first?
Thank you, Vikas. Just before I answer that, attempt to answer that question, I just wanted to let the audience know I passed my 12th standard in Pune. By passing my mathematics paper only because Dr. Vikas Joshi coached me on mathematics. So my reason for coming on this webinar is to say thank you to him. And it's really a pleasure to be here. I think the Chief Learning Officer probably has the most powerful position today to impact the culture of whichever organization they're working in. And I think understanding the business context for the Chief Learning Officer is probably more crucial than it has ever been, just because of how much things are changing, whether it is clients, products, the nature of talent, technology, ways of working. But I think the bridge between human resources and learning and the business has probably is more powerful than it ever is. So I think the role of the Chief Learning Officer as somebody who holds that triangle together has fundamentally changed. And it's probably what's got them the seat at the C-suite as well. And the other thing is, just technology, right? There was a time 10 years ago in learning, the Chief Learning Officer probably did not have to be well versed with what technology can do in terms of improving work as well as learning. I think those days are gone. I think we'll never go back to a CLO not being, doesn't have to be an expert. Like they always say, you don't have to know how technology works, but you need to know what it can do for you. And so a master leverager of technology is another shift that I see in the Chief Learning Officer's role. Let me stop with that and go to somebody who will give a more articulate answer.
So, I love that picture of the cultural change, being a critical part of the role of the CLO. The other thing that I've observed for the last, over a decade now, I had the pleasure of working with a lady named Rita Smith at Ingersoll Rand. She was our CLO. And one of the things she talked about way back in 2010 was the fact that, it was learning how to speak the language of business. So L&D traditionally was not real savvy at the language of business. We had our own special language, things like ADDIE instead of project management, and our level 1 through level 4 versus business metrics and KPIs, and that ability to speak the language and connect the dots between those things is where the CLO has a great opportunity to transform not only the relationship between the business, but also show the impact of what learning can actually do in terms of metrics that the rest of the business understands. As we've gone into the 2021 era, one of the other things that's happening is the relationship between the internal learning and training departments and the community colleges and the universities and other corporate partners has become that much more important. And so that ability to make those connections at the C-suite level to help provide the vision for where L&D has a much broader connection with talent management and organizational development and change management and now we've got DE&I and diversity and inclusion and all of those factors coming into play. The role of the CLO just keeps getting more and more critical every year.
Thanks, Ken. I think those are great notes on which to start this discussion. In fact, as someone who sort of acts as a bridge between the business, its strategy, its the mandate on one hand, and then the people who are ultimately going to be implementing it, and in the process, leveraging the culture to adopt, a mindset of progress. All of this, has it become harder after the pandemic, or is there a bigger opportunity to do it better?
It has become harder because we've been used to doing things in a certain way for such a long time, of having the option of face-to-face and relatively more traditional methods of learning. But I think the more important thing is what you just said. I think it is a humongous opportunity to make a very, very big structural difference forever. And that is in so many ways, whether it is, in managing the kind of virtual events we're managing right now, or whether it is in curating content at 1/10 the cost of what we were doing earlier, whether it is using technology to provide scale and experiences in countries where human beings can't travel. I think the opportunity is huge with the pandemic. But just while preparing for it, the pandemic has also highlighted incredible inequality of infrastructure and resources across the world. Your unconscious bias will get you to focus only on the city and the country that you're in. But like in Standard Chartered, bandwidth issues in Africa and India were very different from what was in Dubai and, in Singapore. And I think that is the other thing for the chief learning officer and the learning function, which is, how do you get your arms around your entire organizational context and then use what you have to deliver maximum impact in the context of those countries or those audiences. But like you said, I think it is an incredible time to be alive because the scale and the exponential possibility of impact, I think, is humongous.
Yeah, I run an organization that's about 750 full-time employees, and I cannot remember a year in the last 30 years when I have spent more time with the chief learning officer than this year. There's discussions about the new collar, skilled individuals, competency development. There's long discussions about psychological safety, wellness of employees, engagement, retention. There's a lot more that's happening between the CEO and the CLO that earlier it was a distant function. You take care of training, and now it's not training anymore. And it's partly a change in the CLO's mindset, partly a change in the CEO's mindset as well, right? Let's move on to our second question, which is, what are some new focus areas for learning and development? Do we see us moving into mental health, well-being, diversity, internal mobility? Are you hearing any of that? Maybe, Ken, you want to get us started on that?
Yeah, so stateside here in the United States, especially, we've had two competing or complementary efforts going on for the last year and a half now almost, because we had a major diversity and inclusion issue or set of issues occur simultaneous with the entire COVID-19 effort that was or impact that was going on. So we not only had a situation where we had to address the needs of the COVID-19 epidemic and the immediate transformation to a remote workforce. To Jody's point a few seconds ago, one of the things that happened, I think that's a benefit of COVID-19 is we showed what we've been talking about for decades, is that we can actually move pretty quickly when we need to. Infrastructure aside, the ability for us to transform to almost 100% non-face-to-face training, even, virtual face-to-face, but non-face-to-face training was amazing. And you saw that happen not only at the corporate level, but at the public school level as well. So that little clause that always was in the business conversations of, oh, we can't move that fast. Oh, we're such a big organization. That has now been proven to be wrong. And it's no longer an excuse for not doing the right thing. The complication that happened on top of it was we had all of this diversity and inclusion that was taking place as well. Now, while the main thrust was on a race-based issue, it pointed out systemic issues that revolved around things like introverts versus extroverts, and people with little children that might be walking in on your virtual meeting, and people that didn't, and those that were in New York City that were used to being able to be at a coffee shop having their virtual conversation, that were now stuck with their 3 kids, 2 cats, a dog, and a husband or a wife or spouse of any kind, working on a computer in the same room because they have a loft and they're not used to being trapped inside a little box. And so all of a sudden, the rules of social engagement for business transformed relatively overnight as well. There was some initial resistance until those at the top were also affected by the same situation. It was there was definitely a class distinction between those until their help that they were used to having in there managing all that couldn't come into their homes. And then they were just like everybody else. So that kind of transformation was all taking place while we're trying to train people, because we at the bank had to transfer all of our contact center folks from being trained in a classroom to now being trained at home. And we had to increase the number of contact center folks we had to deal with all of the communications that were going on. And so tellers and folks that had been in the bank branches were all of a sudden expected to be able to be trained almost overnight to become contact center folks. And so those kinds of transformations were happening nonstop for several weeks, 3, 4 weeks. And it was just like, how, first it was, how are we going to get this done? And then it was, wow, we can get this done. It's just going to take a different mindset. And that's where the CLO comes in and helps shape that vision for what that mindset is. And that's where they have a huge role.
Great. Speaking of the rules of social engagement around business, I recall an online course we developed for a company that actually makes the COVID testing kits. And this was during the first wave. So they were frantically trying to figure out, how to scale up the manufacturing and everything. And this was a program that their CEO office requested. And the program was not for the employees. The program was for the employees' kids. It was for the families on how to cope with the stress of pandemic. I'll talk a little more about that, but let me first come to Jyoti and ask if she has any views on some of these new focus areas of learning and development.
So in the bank, I'm still saying they focused on what they called an umbrella of new ways of working. And it basically had 3 things. It had agile. That was the new buzzword. They wanted everybody to have a basic understanding of what Agile is, and then, in different functions adopt it to its application to a much more detailed level. So you had Agile, and then you had human-centered design, because personalizing experience, whether it was for clients or whether it was for employees, was again, significant. So you had an investment in design thinking, and we partnered with a company called Luma, which made digital content available, and then virtual workshops and face-to-face workshops. And the third was something called continuous improvement. So there was this movement in the organization to say, let's do our bit to just have these incremental improvements in the way we do things. So there was a focus on these three things. And then, of course, there was the usual suspects. There was this entire focus on all the digital disruption topics. So blockchain, artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, again, base level content being made available. The note of caution that I would sound, and I think it's important for chief learning officers, is to protect their community, both the learning and development community as well as the organization, from distraction. There are so many buzzwords flying around. And like I always say, every time a senior leader flies from one city to another and reads an HBR article, our entire framework of business changes. And I think the chief learning officer needs to highlight concept fatigue. So you need to think about what you want to invest in and the framework. But once you've made that investment, I think you've got to stick with it, till you can prove your hypothesis one way or another. But if you change that ever so often, I think people start just getting fed up.
That's so well put, Jyoti. In the business school, we learned that the most important word in strategy is no. What will you not do?
Yeah.
And it's a very common affliction for all enthusiastic professionals to run after the bright, shiny objects, but not every bright, shiny object is going to deliver on the promise.
The quick thing I want to say there is, the flip side, the other way of doing that is to be honest with the community and say, you know what, it is going to change often because that's the nature of the world. That's the nature of the business. Then, there should be congruence between what you're saying and what you're doing, because you'll have senior leaders saying, we figured it out, this is our strategy, and then change it. Then there is, dissonance. But if I say, look, it's a confusing world, our models will change, but we will help you go with the flow, then you're being more transparent with your audience.
Absolutely.
One thing that I'll add to that is, and going back to your comments about Agile, Jyoti, is that whether it's Agile or Spiral or the name of the day for the project management style, the important thing is to do a small piece, test it, get feedback, try, and then go back. You may do a complete 180 at that point, or you may take bits and pieces. There was, for a long time, there was this concept of we have to build the whole curriculum and test it, and try it. And you might spend a year building a curriculum only to find out you totally missed the ball. And so that's where I think some of the benefits of what we've just gone through for the last year, coupled with the fact that it happened to coincide, we had lots of alignment of stars happening. We had Agile hitting and the epidemic hitting and everything else. So all these things required rapid transformation in a way that outside of small innovation companies, big companies just weren't used to doing. They were used to thinking, and I never dreamed of this, I would work for a company where I was thinking in terms of 5-year plans, but I'm actually living through what has now been a 5-year plan, even though it wasn't intended to be, because of the pace of the way that large organizations seem to work. And in the last year, I saw more transformation happen in 6 months than I saw in the first 3.5 years I worked for the bank. I was like, wow, this is great. And but that's that. I think you're right. I think you're right, Jyoti.
This is the program I was talking about. while the research teams were working day in and day out to figure out the COVID test kit, the L&D wanted to ensure that employees and families feel safe and proud about the work those colleagues were doing for humanity. And so when the US was at the peak of the pandemic, to reassure people's families and to help them adopt a positive mind frame about the work of their loved ones, here's a solution that Harbinger proposed. Develop an e-learning module for an audience of 7 to 18 years of age based on the COVID-19 situation. And the module will focus on creating awareness among kids about what their parents are doing these days. The key is not to scare them, but to present them information in a subtle way to let the family members know that the people that work here and the people that they love are safe and healthy. And the company has some of the best and smartest people in the whole world. The work they're doing is hard, takes a lot of time, but it brings a lot of satisfaction of making the humanity successful. So that was the idea, and that was the central message of the training program. It was a huge success at the time it was launched, and it was a very short window of time in which to build it. In fact, I love what Ken said just now about adopting not just an agile mindset, but be willing to jettison what is not working, fail fast, start over. As an entrepreneur, that's how I have lived all my life. It's good to see that coming into enterprises through the L&D route. And nothing is more satisfying than L&D acting as the harbinger of that change within organizations. So great opportunity to walk the talk here. Our next topic is how do we measure L&D success? What are the key performance indicators? And also, Jyoti touched on this briefly. The L&D professionals need to think in terms of design thinking, continuous improvement, agility. What are your thoughts on both these questions? Maybe we could get Ken started here.
Yeah, so one of the things that we started this past year is transitioning from traditional level 1, level 2 surveys and things like that to broadening it with the use of Net Promoter Scores. And I know there's some controversies around Net Promoter Scores, but what was really interesting for us is that there tended to be a pattern of behavior for survey responses in previous methodologies for doing it, and the Net Promoter Scores helped get rid of some of that that non-effective methodology, and it really allowed us to narrow in on. And we did provide fields for people to say, hey, if you want to talk to us directly and things like that. But it's aggregated, it's anonymized. But we did say if you want to have direct contact, that'd be great too. And so we got some really solid feedback, both from what the promoter scores pointed out, as well as what the direct feedback and comments were, and they were much more targeted. Those comments are much more targeted than in previous measurements. The other thing that we've been implementing, although it's been a slower path than I would have liked, is we've been exploring XAPI. So we're for doing activity level tracking, and there's been a drive to implement gamification, not from the standpoint of just the game aspect of it, but to track a different means of employee engagement in the learning. And that focus has been helping us look at what that does for employee retention, for growth, transitioning within the organization, and then risk mitigation, because we're the
Mhm.
bank and we have to be worried about risk. So those are some things where when you start looking at that, not doing full-blown level 4 analysis, but when you're looking at it from that standpoint and looking at results in the business,
Sure.
that's where we're starting to see some impact. And those are different ways of thinking about it. Again, that's where the CLO plays a role, to convince the lines of business that this is important and this will help you see what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so critical to sort of systematically move from effort measures to outcome measures, instead of saying so many hours of seat time delivered to so many heads for so many hours, saying that this is our net promoter score. These are the specific actionable things that we received, or this is how much engagement occurred. You're talking in terms of results, and that resonates so much better with the line of business than the effort measures. That's wonderful. Jyoti, any thoughts on that?
My complaint in the previous organization has been we tend to measure only what we can and not what we must.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so easy to measure time spent. It's easy to measure completions. It's even easy to measure level 1, scores, even NPS. It's relatively easy to send out a question to say, how likely are you to recommend this program or resource?
Mm.
And I think as the L&D community listening in, as well as chief learning officers, we should be very careful about what questions we're asking, because if you ask the wrong question, you are going to get a wrong answer, right? And I completely agree with Ken. I would not ask how are the KPIs of L&D changing. It is not L&D KPIs that should be the starting question. It should be business KPIs. Before that, it should be client KPIs. Who are we in service of? And then you translate from that KPI, once you've convinced yourself that that's the golden measure that you're going after, and convert that to, let's say, an L&D KPI. The other tendency I have seen is, again, somebody flies over and lands in the airport and says, we're not going to measure learning hours anymore. If you have facilitators, we're not going to measure your training man days anymore. I think, again, it's important not to swing from one end of the pendulum to the other. If you have 100 trainers, you do have to know what they're doing and how they're spending their time and how they're developing themselves. And in my past experience, I've actually had business leaders look at me and say, why on earth are you talking about business KPIs? You do your job and let us do ours. So I agree with Ken. The chief learning officer has to have the courage to look at the business and say, if you want us to do learning for your community, you have to co-create the KPIs and the indicators, both leading and lagging with us. Otherwise, we're not coming to the party. I think that is really important. And then, of course, there's always the usual worry. Oh, but if he does well, it's not because of you L&D guys. It's because he had a good portfolio or he's got a great manager. And, it just shows how siloed we are in large corporations. If collective performance was the holy grail, we really wouldn't be fighting about who gets credit for that performance.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree with Jyoti at 1,000,000,000% on that last point. And it is so, one of the things that I'm seeing happening now at Wells, and it's because of we've had some organizational shifts at the top, and so our CLO is now also managing talent. And one of the things that immediately came to mind as I'm thinking about who she's got reporting to her, how we can now work together potentially, is wow, wouldn't it be great if talent management and L&D were really like this instead of over here like this.
Mm.
What a difference that would make just in the perspective of how we tackle competencies. And competencies are one thing, that's the internal, and then there's the actual applied competencies that affect the business. Now we have an opportunity to own both and measure both of those. Wouldn't that be an amazing transformation in any organization?
I'm returning the 1000% agreement, Ken.
Perfect.
We haven't really answered the L&D professional skills. I just want to say again, saving ourselves from distraction, consulting skills, and I know Ken talked about this in developing his own team, asking the right questions, understanding the context of the business will never go out of fashion for L&D. I think there will always be scope for improvement in that space of consulting and understanding the context of the business. But I think in terms of new capabilities, curation is becoming so important. Anyone who spends a lot of time creating content, I would question why are you doing that? Because there is look at this free webinar, right? If it gets recorded, it is a ready-made resource available for people. You should extract as much as you can and curate stuff rather than create stuff. So I think that is, and the other is, how do you then personalize? So that back to design thinking, you may have, it's a bit like the hotel analogy, right? The ingredients in the kitchen are the same. You've got the same vegetables and the sauces, but when it gets presented to the client, it feels like the dish was made for me. And I think L&D's got to figure out a way to do that. The core raw material is the same, but when you land it to the technology audience versus the sales audience, how it feels like it's been personalized. So I think that's another skill for the L&D community. There are many more, but.
Well, one of the things that's interesting is, so at Wells, when I came on board almost 5 years ago, one of the things I realized is that my team, which was made up of folks that had been with the bank, some of them on average 20 years, okay? And within the previous 5 to 10 years for some of these individuals, they had never received training to upskill or to keep improving themselves. They were like the cobbler's kids running around barefoot, and all the leaders and the other folks within the organization had shiny new shoes every year. And I asked my boss, who's now the CLO, at the time, I said, can I set up what I'd done at a previous organization, learning academies? And she's like, well, what is that? And I said, it would be peer driven. They would create the curriculum, and it would be for specific things like a video academy or an audio production academy or a visual design or a game design academy, or we've done Python programming now for things, all these different skills that actually benefit the organization, because for Python, for example, we can do automation scripting to be able to automate some of the things that would, we had individuals spending hours doing, sometimes months. And so I said, no cost, or in a couple of cases, we may have bought, a license to something, but at no cost or very low cost. They'd create the curriculum. They would run the sessions for, 1 week or 12 weeks at 10% of their hours per week. Okay. Well, according to Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and Oprah Winfrey, 5 hours a week is what you should be spending doing your upskilling, right? Well, 10% is 4 hours a week. So you get 1 extra hour you can do something else with. But the goal was to take this group of individuals, get them to work together, have them self-train, scale the operation, so that all of a sudden, instead of just one great visual artist, we now have 15 that can do most of the stuff. You still have, your superstars, but the mundane or the regular day-to-day work could now be done by more than one person without having to add staff. And that was the key. We couldn't grow our staff, but we could grow our staff internally by educating them and giving them the opportunity to practice and put into play for what we were doing. It's been amazing. We have seen multiple FTE return on the investment across it. And we've seen improvement in product as a result of that. Now that, for almost no cost other than time, is an amazing thing. And we've added an additional 6 academies this year for different things. We've got some folks on a level 2, and that's how upskilling can occur, not just across your organization, but your L&D group as well.
Great. That's a wonderful story, and it's really an inspiring story. In fact, that almost answers the next question that was coming up. Some of the things you've done differently to implement upskilling and reskilling initiatives. I wanted to share a story, particularly because you talked about competencies, curation, and personalization, Jyoti and Cam. This is about reskilling at a Fortune 500 company headquartered in Dallas. It's in fact one of the world's largest commercial real estate services and investment firm. And this company has more than 100,000 employees. They needed to train their data center employees globally for over 70 different critical processes related to data center operations. Now, if you take a curriculum view of it, it's like we got to modernize this whole curriculum, right? The problem statement was how to digitize the process training that was in the instructor-led training format. Harbinger immediately realized that digitizing the entire catalog of 70 processes could be a lengthy project. To decide which one of these processes needed focus to start with, Harbinger classified all processes for various competencies that are needed to perform those processes. And then an assessment was done across employees to help identify competency gaps. The results helped us prioritize the content to be curated, and that would help us identify the modules to be digitized. And the digital modules would be used to create learning pathways for specific processes. So now the plan is once the employee goes through the training, the same assessment would be run again to see if the competency gaps are closed and which ones still need attention. So it's simply an iterative process to start with not everything, but just say no, do what is minimum essential, and then iterate, and make some room for failure. So rather than simply digitizing learning content for over 70 processes, that could be a huge project, the enterprise and Harbinger together agreed to take a competency view of the processes to make an immediate business impact. Just thought I'll share that story with you. We do want to take your last thoughts as well as leave some time for the audience to ask questions. So I'll move straight to our conclusion slide here, which is that the role has clearly expanded for the learning and development, and they need to think differently and deeply to meet the expectations of the business. One good frame to think about that is business KPIs. And these KPIs are different from the ones that we have traditionally used. They're more results driven and therefore require the L&D professionals to up their game, learn consulting skills, design thinking skills, technology skills, and so on. And finally, the implementation of skilling initiatives leaves a lot of room for new innovations, new technologies, new modalities, a competency-based view, a curation-based view. So there is a lot that can be done in this regard. What I will do is I'll invite my colleague Arun Bhatt to just take a minute and tell us about how Harbinger can help you in the journey. And then we'll come back to the panel and answer audience questions, as well as let you share some of your thoughts on the last couple of questions. So over to you, Arun.
Thank you, Vikas. So little bit brief about Harbinger Interactive Learning. We are a learning solutions and technology company established in the year 1990 with dual shore operations in US and India, as like communicated by Vikas earlier. We cater to various industries like life sciences, BFSI, EdTech, and catalog training providers, supporting with end-to-end custom content development, modernization, and learning technology solutions. We have a strong team of more than 150 e-learning professionals, right from instructional designers, learning consultants, graphic designers, programmers, and project managers. And I think, like we have some, questions in our chat window. I will read out to panelists. So, like there are, I think, many of them. So I'll be taking them one by one. So we have one question from Todd. So he wants to know, how do you see the future of diversity, inclusion, equity, allyship in the post-COVID world? So Vikas, would you like to take that?
Let me just organize my screen here. I hope my screen share is gone, so we can see everyone. Okay. So when you put me in a spot, you can see all my full face and everything. Yeah, I am a incorrigible optimist when it comes to diversity and inclusion, social equity and mobility. And I think that the pandemic has accelerated a move toward virtualization that I think creates a level, it levels the playing ground a little bit more. You can access knowledge, you can be part of gatherings like this without having to attend an expensive conference or take an expensive flight. You can be there where you want to be from wherever you are. And to me, that's a huge equalizer. And that's what I would start off with. And I can let others chime in or add other points.
I'll just quickly say that I think the role of the learning function and the chief learning officer, their credibility is at stake when we design learning solutions around diversity and inclusion. And what I mean by that is, if you do an e-learning, or if you go through a half-day workshop or a 2-hour Zoom call on D&I, and then you find that in the next meeting, the senior person is hogging all the airtime, or that there isn't a design for voices to be equal in the meeting, your e-learning has now created a counterproductive effect. Because earlier, people didn't expect anything. Someone once said this to me: if you don't tell me anything, then I don't expect anything. But once you say that we value D&I, and then you do something opposite, now I feel cheated. I feel let down. So both the chief learning officer and the L&D function, I think we've got to, and there was another question on what skills do you think are going to be important for the future? The ability to influence without authority is what I call a forever skill. The L&D community has to ask those difficult questions. You're asking us to do D&I, but what are we actually doing and how are we actually behaving in the organization? It is so, Todd, to answer your question, I mean, I think it's a massively important topic. The fight's never going to be won, but it's a journey that's, kind of worth embarking on for the rest of our lives, really.
Ken, your thoughts on this? Would you like to add anything?
Yeah. So one of the greatest things that happened in the past year and a half is, people have become inordinately aware of the differences that we all have, and more importantly, the commonalities that we share as well. And the other thing is the democratization of learning. One of the things I think is fascinating is that with virtual presentations and the transformation to this model of teaching, is that we have the cream has risen to the top as far as those who are really good at making these kinds of presentations, and also those who are really good at being the subject matter experts feeding into it. And sometimes they're not the same people. And so the ability for this information, this dispersal system of knowledge and information to the masses at scale, and oftentimes for free, is an amazing thing. And I've read stories about, you know, children and adults and that have gotten entire college degrees in the past year, that would have never been able to afford it, or never been able to have access to an MIT professor or a Berkeley professor, that all of a sudden had this impact, or professors from India or China or any other country that they would have never been exposed to before. So I think that we're on the tipping point of being much more inclusive. And I think that's fascinating. I think it's a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, Ken. So we have a lot of questions coming in. So I will pick some of them. I think one of the questions which I would divert to Vikas. As a leader, he will be able to guide the audience. So it is hidden challenges startups will have in 21-22. Some suggestions which will help. Vikas, over to you.
That's a hard one. The hidden ones are hidden from me as well, right? So I think the one thing that I have learned through the past few months is that an uncertain future is an opportunity, because particularly from a startup perspective, you're trying to please three different constituencies, right? You have your investors who are uncertain about what their money will do. You have employees who are uncertain about whether their jobs will stay. And your customers, that's your most important constituency, who are uncertain about whether you will be in business or not, right? And so you have to have a way of building a vision on top of a platform that is shifting. And so I go back to what Bezos said a long time back. It's not what is changing that sets your vision, it's what is not changing, right? What will customers always want? What is going to be always important? If you bet your business value proposition on that, then your investors, your employees, and your customers are all looking at that. So this is a little bit off topic from today's discussion, but I just thought I'll give a quick answer to that.
Thank you, Vikas. So in the interest of time, we have a lot of questions coming in. Maybe we can respond to them offline. So we have 3 minutes for this session. So I would take it to the conclusion. So thank you, Vikas, and to our panelists, Ken and Jyoti, for a wonderful discussion. And I'm sure we all are going back with some food for thought today. I would also like to thank our viewers for joining this session through Zoom, and you have been an amazing audience. In the meanwhile, if anyone from our audience would have more questions or would like to reach out to our panelists, please feel free to drop a line at info@harvingerlearning.com. Thanks once again. Take care and have a great fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Jyoti. Thanks, Ken.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.